So, my name is DeCoster.
I'm Emily Compton.
And we, last year at MAGFest, gave a talk on this emerging art movement that we think exists in the world. So what we want to start with, we're going to dive right in. We have a lot to talk about today.
Yeah.
But our thesis from last time remains true. So I want to step through this first because ultimately, this is what we're talking about.
Yeah, and I mean, I think a lot about this stuff. The reason we talk about, we're like hiking in the woods and talking about this like kind of pretentious stuff while we're like up on a mountain somewhere. And I've been in the indie game industry for like almost 20 years now. And so I think a lot about narrative. I went to film school, so like, you know, audio visual media is like front of mind for me. And you've been doing audio for a long time.
I'm a professional talker.
Into music.
I've been talking professionally for more than 20 years.
So we like to think a lot about games and art, but also about like where they came from, what they mean. And so this is our thesis, and based on stuff we've talked about personally in the past.
So the journey we're about to take you on over the next 59 minutes is thusly. Art is a reflection of society. Games are art.
Fuck you, Roger Ebert.
Therefore, games reflect society. Video games are one of the first new mediums of art.
You know, just like how you had film in the beginning of the 20th century really affect the, it was like the quintessential art medium of the 20th century. I would argue that video games kind of do that in the later 20th century and 21st.
Video games were invented in the lifespan of people sitting in this room right now. That is on the blip of human civilization. That is a microsecond ago. The world, currently, outside of MAGFest, is perhaps undergoing a destabilized era.
Things are bad.
We are all anti-fascist. Making art is an anti-fascist act. The world is on fire. A new era of art, we believe, is emerging as a reflection of this destabilized era.
And I mean, you saw this in the past. Other art movements did arise in a reaction to various crises in society.
This new era is reflected in all forms of art, but this is uniquely reflected in video games, a new form of art that is doing something that previous forms of art could not do. And synthesizing video games with all those other forms of art, we have a new kind of reflection of society, and we're going to see things that humanity has never been able to see about itself before. That is our crazy hypothesis.
So, you know, you've probably heard and used the term meta before, right?
You're gamers.
So, like, you're gamers, and people talk about the meta of a game, and often they mean, like, viewing the game from outside itself. It's like a prefix that basically means above or beyond, but sometimes when you say, oh, that's so meta, it's like something kind of reflecting on itself, like a film about filmmaking, or a game that acknowledges that it's a game. That's so meta. You know, so meta often means this like extra layer, this reflective layer on top of something. And contextualism is like a philosophical movement, or like a word that means like the relativity provided by context, like an action or a concept or a thing, art, will be viewed differently based on the context in which it exists.
So, a brief history of art and philosophy.
So we're going to go through history real fast. You know, we don't have time for like art history 101.
When you hear terms like pre-modern, modern, postmodern, you often associate these with art movements, broad art movements, but they are also associated with philosophical movements, and they are to a degree associated with a state that society exists in. The pre-modern world was broadly defined as a society saying it is and seeking toward a Platonic ideal that is in the past. We look to the past where things were perfect, and we try to recreate that lost perfect world.
It was kind of like a circle of tradition. Like everybody was like, my grandfather did this, and therefore we must give the grain to that god because my grandfather did.
The modern era began sometime between the late 1600s and the late 1700s, and we do not have time to talk about what that entails, but the modern philosophy was very different. We are steamrolling forward due to the power of humanity and technology to a Platonic ideal that is in the future, The past was worse, the future can be better, the future is guaranteed to be better through the progress of society.
It's like a rocket ship, like this arrow, just like, future, let's go.
Postmodernity and postmodern art was a direct reaction to the Holocaust and the Great War. That is when society said, if that is the straight line, I reject modernity.
Yeah.
Postmodernity is this absolute deconstruction and destruction of everything we believed about the fruits of progress as a society.
It's like, we got to the future, and the future's really freaking scary. Oh
and
my
think
God.
about modern art and postmodern art, we'll talk about it in a minute, how different they feel. Metacontextualism, we argue, is this sort of step beyond this postmodern ennui and disconnection of trying to put the pieces back together, of seeing the world in context, choosing a future you want.
And we'll also talk about metamodernism, because we got modernism, we got postmodernism, and we got metamodernism, which is similar to metacontextualism, but distinct, I think.
So if you don't get we'll have this up at the end, so don't worry if you don't get a photo in the next 30 seconds. But we did do a talk on this topic last year at MAGFest. We got a ton of feedback from MAGFest that really, all of you out there, really helped us start to crystallize these ideas.
And we thought about it, and we're like, oh, what about this?
So we're moving beyond the prescriptive sort of art history explanation, and now we're going to really focus on what we think this art movement is specifically. So we want to hear from you again. We want to interrogate this art movement together. But the gist of it is, all that feedback, a lot of you out there are seeing the same things we're seeing, and people are pointing me at other video games that do the same thing. I think we're onto something as a group.
So in case any New Yorkers are in the audience, this is a similar image. It's the Unisphere in Queens. And a similar image was on my essay textbook for freshman year of college at NYU. But the name of that freshman writing class was Art and the World. And basically, this is where I was introduced to a lot of these concepts. The idea that art and how it interacts with society are very important things for a filmmaker to think about. And so I think the first part of this talk is really going to be, this is the tagline for that as well, is Art in the World. But one thing we aren't going to do is, just like in a lot of your game design talks, where people are like, what is the definition of a game? This is a game, this is not a game. It's like, we're not gonna get pedantic about it. It's like there are like thousands of academics out there who argue about what art is and what art isn't. And rather than getting into that, I really would like to say a definition of a facet of art that I think is really important, that art isn't just a work or an object, but it is that distinctive relationship between viewer and viewed. It's something that is almost like a conversation. And like this image is somebody, and they were using electrodes to like scan the brain of somebody looking at great masters, looking at a girl with a pearl earring. So it's like, how do people react to art? And what is that, that conversation like? So just like individuals are looking at art, society as like a whole, as like an agglomeration of like a bunch of individuals, they all view these artworks. We play these games, we talk about them, and new mediums can change the way society interacts. Do they listen? Do they watch? Do they touch?
Yep.
You talk about film.
You decontextualize and recontextualize things that happened in the past. This image is very important because this is a form of remediation. We have taken an event that previously would only be experienced by the people who were there, or described with very low fidelity after the fact, and now it is presented semi-objectively with a big asterisk next to that in a different context to a different audience.
I mean, they're watching it in an opera house. That's, it's a little bit different than being at Madison Square Garden and watch them punch each other in the face.
But in modernity theory and bureaucracy theory, you can broadly say that large systems, the art that they consume as a whole is their sensory organ. A big machine can't see the people in it. It can only see these broad things. Society can't see you. It can see the art that the collective you have made, and different forms of art, different mediums, different technologies record different kinds of things with different levels of fidelity, and they play them back with different kinds of fidelity. So again, video games are able to record something that other mediums couldn't.
And I want to, on this slide, really quick, introduce the concept of gaze or perspective, which it really changes, like, who is controlling the character in a video game? Like, who is the player character? Who is watching? Like, I often describe it as a camera, and that's definitely a metaphor that's been used before. It's like, who's holding the camera? Like, whose perspective are you seeing art through? So we all have these different lenses or cameras that we see art and we see the world through.
Yep.
And so do societies.
I remember something from university. You may not know if the cameraman is holding a gun.
So, and just like society looks at art, art looks back at society. Almost all art reflects society in some way. Like, it can be critical, like The Jungle. It can be idealized, like in this Soviet realist painting.
Soviet realism trying to portray an ideal society, not the actual photograph of that society.
And then aspirational. This is reacting to fascist aggression. And, you got Captain America coming in. It's like the very creation of this patriotic character is put up as a reaction to European war.
And then society looks at this art, and then society starts behaving differently because of that art, and then the art changes, and this causes this reflexive loop. And that's a big part of what we're going to be talking about, is that reflexive loop.
And that's very meta, the idea of like looking at something from outside and kind of reflecting on it. Meta is X looks at X and is about X. So, I guess since we're not going to go too deep into the modern era and the postmodern era, it is worth it to talk a little bit about these different art movements. And a lot of times when people talk about modern art or think about modern art, they think of non-representational art, like shapes and colors and stuff. But really, I think what makes a work modern is there was this idea of trying something new and trying progress. It's like, I made a new technique that hasn't been tried before. And this whole idea of truth, like true art and art for art's sake, as opposed to like, I'm an animator, so I'm kind of like freelancer, if you think about it, is an old term that means a mercenary. Like, I make art for other people, generally speaking. I also make it for myself, but most of the art I make is like, I'm paid to do so. And there was this idea that, no, art must be this pure thing that is expressing some sort of either like internal or external truth. And then you see a little bit in postmodern works like Andy Warhol, or this is a Barbara Kruger piece. And I've always thought this one, I'm a big fan of Barbara Kruger. We say intricate rituals a lot when we're talking about sports being homoerotic. But it's like
men, what is it? Men create intricate
rituals to touch the skin of other men. Anyway, this is a piece of hers that says, "You are not yourself." And it shows this shattered mirror in front of a photograph. And that's, I think, what really typifies for me what postmodern is. It's often a lot of, irony and collage. It's basically like parody is the supreme form of postmodern art, is like you're looking at something, but you're also kind of acknowledging the brokenness of it. Like, people will talk about it. It's a deconstruction.
So we're not seeing how these societies are that created these two pieces of art. We're seeing how those societies saw themselves or wanted themselves to be seen.
How they reacted to these times in which they were created. And then you have metamodernism. And this is something, last year, that's a big thing. What differs between last year is that metamodernism is a term that I've seen a lot to describe certain works of fiction, everything, everywhere, all at once. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But like, that was described by the director as a meta-modernist work. And so meta-modernism is kind of like backing up from postmodernism and saying, whoa, let's not get like all nihilistic and being like, nothing matters if you can't have truth. If truth is like thrown out the window and everything is relative, then you can't really have like a sincere viewpoint. You can't really structure anything. And so metamodernism is pulling that back and kind of having like a sadder but wiser creation of like ironic sincerity, where it's like you see all the relativity in the world, but at the same time, you're able to make a more sincere and heartfelt, you're able to construct your morals and say, this is a good ending, or this, and so this image of someone being reflected again and again and again, instead of the mirror versus the shattered mirror, here you have almost the infinite mirror, where you just keep looking and reflecting, and that kind of back and forth, that pendulum keeps going.
Now, we think metacontextualism, which is what we made up, is a probable subset or adjacent art movement in philosophy. It's interrelated, but I think it's distinct.
Well, yeah, I think, because I said contextualism tends to be more about, instead of just self-searching, it tends to also look outside a little more and build this context. And we'll talk a lot about that in relation to video games. So, but here, before we get into video games, I want to really quick talk about one thing that I noticed over the past decade or so. How many works are meta about the multiverse? Like, I think it probably showed up mostly in like the 70s in comic books and science fiction, because they already had these existing IP characters that they're like, oh man, we've had so many artists and so many writers take a crack at these characters, and they all like are subtly different. So I think multiverse as a trope has been kind of the way that a lot of these creators or IP owners, as the case may be with stuff like Marvel, to kind of bring that back together and be like, okay, so like there's not just one, instead of being like, this is the one canonical Spider-Man, it's like, there's infinite Spider-Mans. There's so many Spider-Mans. If you draw pictures of Spider-Man, that also joins Spider-Man. But this story is about this one Spider-Man and what he cares about and his whole deal. And the same thing with Loki, Deadpool, and here in the middle, everything, everywhere, all at once. It's the idea that we're going to talk about the infinite worlds. I mean, even in physics, there's this idea of the infinite worlds hypothesis, where everything could happen simultaneously. But we acknowledge that, but we move past that to kind of focus in on what is important to our characters.
And I think it's noteworthy that every one of the works we have on this slide, they fundamentally are saying the same thing about multiverses, and they all kind of have the same moral, and that is a wide range of different types of stories telling the same fundamental story. And
another thing that we kind of wanted to get into, we'll talk a little bit about 3 motifs that we've noticed, but beyond that, has anybody taken a gander at the Artist Alley this year so far?
A lot
of good stuff, and we love to do that.
Mushrooms, transforming things, skulls,
bones, flowers and bones,
death, artistic gore. There's a lot of that in this Artist Alley.
So one of the things that I really noticed a couple of years ago is I noticed that a lot of artists were taking the idea of like a multi-eyed, or almost like approaching body horror, but like figures, like very beautiful figures of animals and humans were like kind of bisected or broken apart. And so you see this almost like artistic gore, whereas like bones will be visible and like an arm will be like here. And I think almost like that's the shattering, right? You're taking these forms and kind of breaking them apart. And then you have all these multi-eyed deities almost,
like
these
this
creatures.
Transcendent idea of I want to see more, or I do see more, or there are multiple me's.
Yes. And then a lot of the other thing is like death and rebirth. It's almost like, in Victorian times or times when there was a lot of struggle, there would often be these visual motifs that reference death, but at the same time kind of romanticized it, kind of made it into an aesthetic. You see that with Poe and stuff like that, the Gothic side of things. So
And this is what kicked
something
off this whole conversation. Is we kept seeing these themes, and we started Googling around, and we found more of it, and then we started talking about this on the mountain.
Yeah, we went to artist alleys, we watched a bunch of Spider-Man movies, and then we really were like, maybe there's something there. I wonder why these things keep showing up again and again.
And I'll call out Paper Larva there in the top left. They're in the artist alley here.
Yeah, the one with the insect girl on the upper.
So these are, and Emily chose these after a lot of discussion. There's a lot of metacontextual motifs we could talk about. To be specific for today, we're going to talk about 3 of them in depth.
The giant. So we're going to talk about juggernauts, and I'll let you explain the whole concept of juggernauts. We're going to talk about the mirror, which already came, when I was explaining metamodernism, and death and rebirth. And I think actually maybe the third one is the most important, because really that's kind of putting the world back together after it shatters.
So as an aside then, we have to talk a little bit about why video games are different and what they're doing differently in this context. And don't try to read all that, but broadly, the story of video games is that they bring you into a different world that has its own rules. You as a player inhabit, for a brief span of time, a different world, and you have the context from outside that world, but it puts you in a game that has its own context. Whether or not the game explores that or not is how metacontextual a game is. But fundamentally, we believe that interactive video games are, to a degree, fundamentally metacontextual. The meta cannot disappear. We do not have the technology to erase your brain and put you into Mario World, where you then have to interact with it from first principles.
And then you go,
yes.
Waha!
But think about that a lot. Think about, as we talk, as we go through all this, think about, among the crowd, what could these games be reacting to in the real world? And what is this game saying about you, the player, versus the world of the game? So if games are art, game mechanics can be art. We gave a talk earlier in this convention about how game mechanics are the same as games. They're fundamentally the same thing. So game mechanics, board game mechanics, can be art in the same way that the jungle is art. If you don't know how Monopoly was written and what that game's about, Monopoly was not designed to be a game you played for fun. Monopoly was a work of protest art about landlords ruining the world. So I want to talk very briefly about the Dutch East India Company and the British East India Company. I would characterize these, a lot of modernity research, they use the term giant or juggernauts. And this is the idea that this is an entity that is not controlled by a human. It's controlled by something else, a collective of humans. And it has its own reflexive loop. It acts kind of on its own. And I would argue that these 2 East India companies, one, are the first modern corporations, literally the first 2 modern corporations, and that there were basically 2 giant robots that marched around the world causing death and misery for a couple hundred years before we had to put them down. Now we are surrounded by juggernauts.
There's a lot of crazy Evas out there that eat in the world.
So I want to talk about a modern tabletop game versus a postmodern, possibly metacontextual game. Puerto Rico and John Company are both about juggernauts like those. This is dark subject matter. These games are about colonial exploitation.
So ortho games.
An ortho game. Yeah. That leads into. So ortho game is a technical term, to be specific. That means we're talking about games that are competitive. Games that rank players at the end of the game based on how well they did. American football is an ortho game. Dungeons & Dragons is only an ortho game if you're a masochist.
It's a term invented by Richard Garfield, who's the creator of Magic the Gathering.
Because he wanted to get away from people saying that's not a game because he thought that was a stupid thing to say.
Okay, I'm going to make a specific word for this kind of competitive, versus type of game.
So Puerto Rico, you play the Juggernaut. You play a company that is exploiting the colony of Puerto Rico. This game is about fucked up things like slavery. The game rewards you for being the best at it because the game, the mechanics are in the context not of the people, not of the harm, not of the externalities. You are playing the system itself.
So the system is going yum, yum, yum,
Yep.
money, money, money.
You eat things
Yeah.
and win. You are in that context.
So why it's a modern game, in your estimation, is because it looks at this uncritically. It's like number goes up is good.
Yep.
So
You won because you got the most victory points. The externalities of what ruin you wrought on the world, that's not included in the victory points at the end of the game. John Company is a game you should all play. John Company is about the British East India Company. You play individual families and people who work for the John Company. So you are not playing the company eating the world. You are playing the people who are operating the machine but barely have any control over it. And your motivations, the victory points you get, are marrying your daughter off or buying a nice hat. Like, it puts you in the context of how this happened, how this juggernaut came to be. It is deeply critical of the situation. It is reflexive and reflective of the nature of these institutions.
would you say almost in some ways it's kind of like a parody or a deconstruction of these, so many games, we love Euro games, right? We're big tabletop gamers. But it is kind of uncomfortable how many games both deal with colonialism and the exploitation of resources. So I think it's kind of interesting that a little bit more recent games tend to kind of reflect on that fact and be like, hey, that's kind of fucked up.
Yeah. So, Idiogame is a different kind of game. And if you played the Stanley Parable, you know exactly what an Idiogame is.
So in a way, that's kind of like, we wanted a word that kind of stands opposite to orthogame. It's a game about ideas.
I made that word up about 14 years ago in a lecture at a different convention, and not many people use it, but I use it. But a series of interesting decisions that lead to a personal outcome. An example of that, Stanley Parable, you're playing this game, and there's a narrator. And you encounter two doors at the beginning of the game, and the narrator says, Stanley chose the door on the left. And you can go through either door, and the game reacts to that. Every playthrough of the game is different. You decide whether or not you stop the baby from going into the fire. Idiogames are very popular and common. If you've played Baldur's Gate, that is like an archetypical Idiogame. Look at the stats of how many people played Gale. And also, I love how this game is about how Gale ruined the polycule between Elminster and Mistra. Dispatch. If you have played Dispatch, this is an Idiogame. The whole game, you're making these little micro decisions, and it's broadly the same story. But the decisions you make change the little beats along the way. So when I play Dispatch, I have a slightly different experience from how you play Dispatch.
I mean, it's a lot like watching, I feel like Critical Role has made a couple of TV series, like The Mighty Nine just came out, and we watched a few episodes of that. And I feel like this has kind of a similar vibe to it. You know, it's a superhero story, it's like episodic, but at the same time, you do experience like TV shows through your own personal viewpoint, but you don't have that direct like back and forth with the narrative itself.
So it lets you explore all these little possibilities. If you wanted to explore those possibilities in traditional non-video game media, you'd have to make 50 versions of the Spider-Verse. This TV show has 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000 different iterations. It's probably uncountable or nearly uncountable. But that is a metacontextual mechanic because now you're exploring these themes, you're exploring all this, but it is a very modern story. The game is a metacontextual game mechanically, but the story is fairly straightforward.
Yeah, the narrative's very linear, and it's if you've seen a superhero story, it won't necessarily be critical or parroting or anything of that.
It does
just
some
kind of
deconstruction.
straightforward.
There is a little bit of that there.
Yeah.
And it is deeply meta. Every episode
Very
ends,
meta.
and it tells you what you did compared to everybody else in the game. These are not new either. Idiogames were some of the first video games that were made. This game is basically Baldur's Gate before Baldur's Gate existed as you know it. There are so many very deeply contextual, metacontextual idiogames out there. So it's not new.
So one thing I kind of want to talk about with idiogames and why it's particularly distinct and it's is very personal. Like, even if the game, such as Dispatch, follows most of the same narrative beats, no matter who's playing it, it really formalizes that idea that everybody's going to have a unique experience with that piece of art.
But in the same context of that art. So we can talk about, did you kill Shroud at the end of the game?
Yeah.
And you can have that conversation with someone because you experience two different worlds, but they're in the same context of the work. Night in the Woods, I would say, it is a deeply metacontextual game. Now, it's using the same simple mechanic as Dispatch. You're making these little micro decisions. Every night, when you can hang out with your friends in this Pennsylvania coal town being ravaged by capitalism, you decide who to hang out with. The game forces you to make these decisions, and your playthrough is a little bit different depending on how that goes. Like, you see different facets of the world. But the rest of the game, the story, the motif, the other mechanics we'll talk about later in this talk, they are also exploring these metacontextual motifs. So I would say that Night in the Woods is a metacontextual story using a metacontextual medium, whereas Dispatch is a more modern or postmodern story still using a metacontextual medium.
Yeah, games are very branchy. Like, at its core, you've got like something like a choose your own adventure book, where it's like, okay, you're gonna kind of find your semi-unique path through a narrative. But on the other hand, you have these adventure games that kind of, you're missing out on certain things. You can't see everything. And so I think that's very important to games as a concept. Mm-hmm. Like, you can't play the whole thing. And some people are completionists, and like they're like, okay, I'm gonna go on YouTube and then play Baldur's Gate like 5 different times so I can see all the different routes.
Yep. But think about real life. In our real world, we can never experience everything. Night in the Woods puts you in the context of you go back home and you have to choose who you hang out with. And that has consequences because every choice of something is, in the real world, a denial of the alternative choices. You don't get to do both. We don't have save points. So the game's narrative is broadly the same. The story is not different fundamentally.
You have to pick your way through the multiverse.
You have to decide who is more important to hang out with tonight. You have to decide where your camera is going to be at any given time, and then you just have to trust the mediated experience of all the other people in that world to find out what happened in the places you weren't. Just like in the real world. You don't know what's happening outside of MAGFest except via the mediated experience of news.
And then you feel FOMO because your friend posted something about like the MAGFest arcade on Instagram or something.
But slay the princess.
Yes.
Moderate spoilers if you have not played this game, but I don't think spoilers really apply to this game for complicated reasons. Slay the Princess is, I think, one of the most deeply metacontextual games we've encountered so far. So we're going to talk about it a lot.
We both played through it. We like to sometimes, like, you'll play a game and you're like, we should play through it together on the couch. And this was one of the games we did that with. And
watching you play this was fascinating.
Well, see how the other person makes different decisions than you, or how it evolves when somebody else is kind of driving the story. And so in this case, it starts very simply. And we talk about what context does it give you? Very little. It just starts, the game says,
you are on a path in the woods. There is a cabin at the end of this path, and in the cabin there is a princess. You need to slay the princess,
or the world will end.
That's the starting point. This game, it's not just that you're having a context in a video game. Mario Brothers has a context. This game puts you in this very minimal context, and the whole game is about exploring that context. In this game, you're making these decisions, and there's the princess. The princess is not an agential actor. This is a video game. This is a deterministic video game. There aren't stat blocks.
But it's also kind of like an iteration. Like, every choice you make in this game has an impact, has a very deep impact on what this character will be like the next time you meet her.
And thus the princess becomes this mirror of you, meaning every single decision you make causes the princess to be the way she is, and then you have to start over, and now the princess as she is now is the new context, and you have to react to that.
And this is a really interesting, this isn't much of a spoiler, but one of the first things you do when you go into the cabin, because that's one of the only things you can do, there's a cabin and there's a knife sitting there. do you take the knife downstairs with you? Because you're like, scary dark
Did anyone play
basement
this
stairs.
game? Who brought the knife with them the first time in? Who didn't bring the knife with them?
I did bring the knife, and she was not super jazzed about that.
But she changes radically because the context of the environment changes radically. So she becomes this deep reflection of the choices you have made. And to force you into this corner, when you play through the game again, you can never make the same exact decisions twice. The game forces you to put yourself in a different context every time you play it. The cabin, the set of the entire game effectively, is a reflection of the world you make together, because you are interacting with the princess in the game is then interacting with you, and the cabin reflects the world you have made.
So in a way, we talked about multiverses, right? So there's this whole idea of like, oh, what if a butterfly got crushed and you did something minor and then like, it spiraled off into a whole nother dimension where things are crazy different. And this is kind of like that. That's exploring the impact of your choices. And it's kind of like but it's also like iterating on these themes.
But where it starts to get really interesting, the game has these voices. As you play, the princesses you encounter based on your decisions and the world you make cause these voices to appear. They are explicit context from inside of the game. They are the voice of the character you inhabit. If that character does not have the context you have as a human being, knowing it's a video game playing a game. When your character dies, you can think, that was cool, and play again. They remember what it's like to die, and it is terrifying to them. They don't want to die. They only know what has happened in the game, and they talk to you, and they talk to each other. But they see you, the player. They know that you're the one making the decisions, and they are powerless to stop you. So they're almost reminding you of, this is what the world you made looks like from inside the character you are playing.
But they know nothing. They know nothing of the other variations. They have only lived one time.
Arguably, they are you, the player, if you erased your brain before you started playing the game. The game is saying, this is what you would be like if you experienced the world that you, the player, had made. If you had made this context for someone else to be born into. Then we have the narrator. The narrator is the game designer's voice. The narrator is a character in the game, distinct from these voices and distinct from you, telling you context. But what's fascinating to me, those voices, they know certain things. They don't know what the narrator knows. The narrator knows things that you as a player don't know, and these voices don't know. You as a player, you know things the voices don't know, but you have no idea whether or not to trust the narrator.
The narrator is all context, no meta.
Yeah.
But like, imagine, so you make a game, you send that game out into the world, but you don't know how people, unless you're watching live streams after the fact, but you don't know how other people are interacting with the game. You're not inside the game recording everybody's playthrough. So you're like, here's the context, now you bring the meta.
And even better, as you explore the game, the narrator you start to realize the narrator doesn't remember the loops. So the voices remember the loops, you remember the loops, but the narrator doesn't. So the narrator is almost like an echo. The narrator is dead. The narrator may not even be sentient. The narrator is, I made a game, just like you said, play it, I'll never see what happens in that game. Because the creator God is dead, commonly said in art. And as you play the game, you build your own context in this reflexive loop. All these possibilities start forming this environment that if you've played this game, you know how much this game sticks with you. You think about it a lot after you play through it. But the context of the game is explicitly and always that you are playing a game. The game still reminds you, with things like achievements, that you are intended to explore this space.
You're not afraid of dying.
Yeah.
That's the other thing. Like, okay, so I'm playing Mario, right? It's like, if I fall in a hole or a Goomba gets me, it's kind of like, whatever.
If I died in real life when Mario falls in the hole.
Yeah. So it's like, you don't fear death because you have, the player is a complete different existence outside the game. And this game I found really interesting because I think it was all about the relationship between player, like what is a player character and how does it exist versus like what does a designer bring to the table?
And it makes you form all this context and you explore all these princesses and you encounter all these worlds. And then the game presents you with a single final choice. Even the bad things that happen are important because you need to the more you understand, the more prepared you are to make that crazy choice. And that is the ultimate conclusion of the game. You need context to make a choice. Without context, you will make worse choices. And the game explores that very deeply. So to get to what you were talking about.
Exactly. So you have your player, which is you, a human being. You have the vessel, which is just like a character on a screen that has no agency.
And the game tells you that vessel feels pain. That vessel is not you.
But it doesn't actually. It's like, you know, AI is not conscious. People keep saying, oh, maybe it will be in the future. I don't know.
LLMs will never become conscious, but some other technology will.
As it is now, it's a lot more like this. It's something created and it can kind of show the parameters in which it was created. It has a lot of memories that is put into it, but it is not experiencing the thing as you.
But this turns, instead of a two-way conversation of I look in the mirror to better understand myself, now I'm looking in the mirror and I'm also looking at what's behind the mirror and I'm merging all of that together into my entity. And if you want to play another game that has done that, if you've ever played Undertale or Deltarune,
This was another one that I'm like, oh, we should have put that because you know that actually explores some of the same sort of stuff.
Do you know how many people came up to us after the last year's talk and said, you didn't talk about Undertale? And I was like, yes, we had 59 minutes. What do you want? Let's talk about Disco Elysium. We're going to come back to this concept, though.
We're going to talk a little bit more about it.
Disco Elysium effed me up. Talk about context. You play an amnesiac hero. Now, Planescape Torment also does the same thing, if you haven't played that old game.
Actually, it's not uncommon for games to start with like the character in a fantasy setting has lost their memory. I mean, wasn't that kind of like that in Baldur's Gate? Also had an amnesiac character. So the idea that the character is discovering the world, the context of the world,
the same as you.
Just like the player is.
You don't know where your shoe is, and neither does he. And together, you've got to find your shoe, or not. But Disco Elysium really uses that video game mechanic and goes hard. It has that concept of the red checks. The game is telling you, you can make decisions, you can have conversations, you explore the world, but when there's a red check, that is irrevocable, and you've got one shot at it. Whatever the consequences of that choice are, you're gonna live with them, or you're gonna save scum and reload. But the game is really forcing you to follow that video game and build that context for this character to see where it goes. Some of these choices are really funny. Some of them are really dire. Some of them are really gonna mess you up. But one we should talk about, I don't know if anyone interacted with the Boule. There's two old guys. And they're basically playing a game with a ball. It's
kind of like bocce ball. It's like the old man in the park who are doing bocce.
But here's the thing. I, as a player, a human being, I know bocce exists, and I see they're playing bocce, or a game like it. Your character is sure they understand this game. And you can try to join these old guys and play the game with them. And you have a check where you'll have success or failure. You can either succeed at playing this game or fail at playing this game. If you succeed, you pick up one of these balls and shot put it into the fucking ocean. And they are very angry at you. Because success is failure. This game is messing with you. This game takes the context you as a human have as a player. If I succeed at a test, it's a good idea, and says, no, succeeding at your task is not always success in the way that you want it to be. Later in the game, you have the choice of whether or not to attempt to kiss your ex-wife. I suggest not succeeding at that test. So the character, the player, this game is exploring decisions you make without context are often wrong. You are better off knowing more, but the game is also exploring knowing more is painful. This character has amnesia on purpose because he learned things that were so painful, he would rather not know them.
People talk about brain bleach. We'd be like, I wish that hadn't entered my neurons.
In modernity, you cannot unknow something you know. If your world shatters, you have to live in that new context.
Well, also, you can't go back to the past. That's the other thing. It's like time marches forward, whether you want to or not. And you have to kind of, games are kind of nice because you can be like, oh, I have a safe spot. But life doesn't have those safe slots. And sometimes you have to live in video games and in real life with the consequences of your actions.
So the game explores that painful context is necessary to be birthed into a wider world. So let's take the case of one character in this game, Measurehead the Racist. You encounter this character. Now this character is trying to turn back the clock and go back to a past that never existed, as all racists are.
Yeah, but also the interesting thing about it is like, it's not like the game points to him and says, this character is a Nazi, he is your enemy. Basically, you listen, he spouts this like absolute babble, and you
like 20 pages of racist nonsense.
Blah, 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 but it's like not racism in the context of real world, but you just, by what he's saying, you're like, this guy is no good.
He's one of them.
Yeah.
So you have to decide how to deal with this guy, because you got to get past him to do a thing. So you can avoid him. Like, you can just try to like not engage with him and go off and do something else. You can kick his ass, which I highly recommend. Or, now this is where Baldur's Gate, I would argue, is a more postmodern game, whereas this is a metacontextual game. Baldur's Gate, bad endings and good endings are equally fun and equally well supported.
Yeah, they wrote the Dark Urge, even some of the developers said, they wrote the Dark Urge as the player character they kind of wanted people to pick, and that's kind of like the more dark, and it has the possibility to go full evil, you know?
One of the ways to get past him, instead of fighting him, is internalize his racist nonsense. Now, I want to point that out. That is text I copy-pasted from a guide on how to play Disco Elysium. That is modern advice. Think about what those words mean with the context of what you know. To further increase our chances of passing the check, we can say and do fascist actions, like agreeing with the racist lorry driver or opting into fascism.
But here's where the meta comes in. As the player, I think most people, at least if they're...
I don't want to roleplay a racist.
They share my morals, are generally like, no, I don't want to do that. That's bad.
So in Baldur's Gate, if you embrace evil, you get a bunch of fun evil stuff to do.
Yeah, you're like, yes, evil. But it's like sometimes in the context of a game, you bring your own morality and your own context into the context of the game. If you're starting from zero, you're like, okay, stats go up, just like Puerto Rico. Oh, I made my number go up. Good. This helps me in this game. But because we exist in a more complex world where we have feelings outside the game, we will make the decisions accordingly.
Knowledge outside the game. We've seen through the mirror. We know that there's a world outside of the video game. So with Measurehead, if you do that, if you internalize that racism to be able to engage with him, it marks your character permanently. There's the thing in Disco Elysium where you start collecting thoughts. And if you do this, you are forced to have this thought. You cannot take it out of your brain for the rest of the game. It makes your partner trust you less. It changes several outcomes in the game. It indelibly marks your character in a bad, negative way that makes the game less fun and kind of screws you over. Because that is what racism does to real people in the real world. And your character is this deeply, intimately reflexive entity. Your portrait changes based on things you do in the game.
Well, it's kind of like your own self-image, right? It's like, okay, it's not just, what your character looks like, it's kind of how your character feels and what your character thinks. Like the one in like the lower left, that's like if you choose to be the fascist person and be like, oh, Revachol for Revachol people.
I mean, the game is so explicit because the context of the game is the context of the real world. The game the game, just like Undertale, says you played the game wrong because you're a bad person. But the character portrait changes. The game keeps track of fascist things you did and communist things you did. And it's not even saying communism good, it's just saying fascism bad.
One thing I think that is really funny about the game, the game is from Estonia, so I think, being one of the Baltic states gives you a certain perspective on the complexity of
the most common, the thing that socialists and communists do the most is fight with other socialists and communists.
Yeah. So...
But the game is not just in the context of the real world. The game is also telling you about the real world that you know. We're living through another apocalypse right now. We're on the edge of World War III if it didn't already start. And the game is putting you, this game is set in the counter-revolution. The mass socialist uprising failed. The fascists and the capitalists broadly won. And you're living in the ruins of that failed revolution. And the game is telling you that the world could perhaps be better. And the game explores being a reflexive entity in a world that is an apocalypse. How do you put it back together? That is what this game is explicitly about, and it brings your real-world context into the game to make you feel that intimately and viscerally. And that scene is one of the most breathtaking scenes in the game.
I like that scene a lot.
Night in the Woods. It's the same context. Everyone who grew up in one of those Pennsylvania coal towns said, I think that game was set in my specific town, and here's why. Because this is a common story. So many of our small towns were destroyed by, current day modern capitalism.
Honestly, when I was playing it, it was right after I had been up to visit the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, which is a big mining area. And it felt like it hit pretty hard after.
So now we're going to move on from the video game mechanics
into
the recognition of giants, those juggernauts we talked about before.
Well, it's basically like, at its core, it's about seeing systems. And the idea that in games contain mechanics, right? It's using your real-world knowledge to identify the systems in the games, but also kind of the systems in society. But these games also kind of talk about that. Like in the game's world, the characters also talk about seeing the bigger picture within their setting.
So this very specific scene, you get this parable of the giant snake, and there's a small town, and it's being surrounded by a giant snake. And bit by bit, other towns realize that they're all being surrounded by the same giant snake. Think about what happens to small town America. The snake is capitalism. I can be very blunt about it. There is a system. There is something bigger than us, not controlled by us. But we're looking beyond the mirror. And these games, metacontextuality explores, we need to see the forces that are ruining the world or making the world better.
But sometimes in games, this is also shown as the characters kind of recognizing the systems within the game and being aware of the mechanics themselves.
In the parable, the small towns, once they realize it's all one big snake, they band together to kill the snake. Disco Elysium says capitalism is one of these things. Moral in turn, the UN, the world order, the game explores specific systems that exist in the real world via analogies in the game, and you interact with these systems. But you're just a human. You can't control them. They're bigger than you. They're like gods walking around. We can barely direct them. Metacontextual games also really seem to explore not just seeing they exist, but trying to talk to them, trying to engage with them, trying to interact with them, steer them, anything.
So in this, it's often like with May, she has a bunch of dream sequences where she kind of is interrogating like the world and how it's affecting her.
You see this allegory for a human interacting with and trying to interrogate humanity. A culture is a collection of a bunch of people, but a culture kind of moves on its own through the collective interaction of all those people. One person doesn't control that culture, so how do we interact with the things that are bigger than us?
It's the bee versus the hive.
Disco Elysium hits this really hard. There are moments in the game where the city of Revachol speaks to you directly. It is portrayed
kind of anthropomorphized, like the idea of the sense of a place. And a word that's used a lot to describe I believe it's like literally translated like the ghost of the era is a zeitgeist. You know, you'll hear people talk about the zeitgeist of this. It's basically like the vibes of a given time and place.
I am not saying that New York City as an institution is itself sentient. Do not get me wrong. But it is a reflexive, self-moving entity. It is not controlled by an individual human. There are people broadly trying to steer it, but it is its own thing. And seeing that and trying to interact with that is a big theme, I think, in these metacontextual artworks, because we are starting to, if postmodernity says we are powerless against these cosmic forces that will destroy us, these games and this art is saying we can see them, we can name them.
And sometimes I think this is, I see a lot of people doing like Gijinka and stuff, where like you'll have an anthropomorphized thing, but sometimes it gets really abstract. Like it will be a concept or a nation or something like that. That's, I think, there's one called Scandinavia in the World that I used to read. It's like all the European states are like little characters.
So in our last 5 minutes, the mirror from the beginning, to slay the princess. Mirrors are so common in these works that we would consider metacontextual. They explicitly include the mirror. They make you look in mirrors. In Disco Elysium, you decide if you even want to know what you look like.
Well, I think part of the reason that mirrors come up so much is because it's very, back to that initial slide, the art looking at society, society looking at art. It's a very reflexive symbol, right? So like reflexive, reflective, it's basically like the character and you are both kind of like looking back.
So Night in the Woods, and
this is an interesting thing we just noticed the other day.
If you zoom in a little bit, everything on the mirror, the stickers are reversed because you as the player are actually looking at May from the other side of the mirror. You're not playing May looking at herself. You're playing the player looking at May from the other side of the mirror. And I learned that a week ago. Anyone played Deltarune? Yeah. Deltarune interacts with mirrors. Undertale interacts with mirrors in an extremely reflexive way that we're not going to get into. But Deltarune has something very specific I want to show you. This is a crazy moment in this game. You are playing characters, and those characters are playing themselves in another video game. You've got a screen and another screen and then the player. And then you switch the controllers, and then one of the characters freaks out about this and turns to look at you, the player. And this is explicitly part of the core of what this game is about.
Yeah, the acknowledgement of the game to the player outside the game. And I mean, we're talking about things that are considered metamodernist. Wes Anderson is another director who has actually said, yeah, it's like my work is metamodernist. And Asteroid City, it's what did Scott say? It's the most Wes Anderson movie. But it has like a book or a play within a movie, and it goes on all these different levels of narrative. And at the very end,
it zooms all the way out to the actors performing the show, talking to each other about what the show is about. This is the exact same mechanic in a movie as this in Deltarune. But the mirror and slay the princess leads us to the final motif. We only have about 2 minutes left. A big theme in a lot of work about modernity is the idea of shattering the mirror, that you have to look beyond the reflexive mirror and see the context of the world around you. The analogy of divorce is in every essay I have ever read about modernity.
But it's like, anybody ever seen Revolutionary Girl Utena?
The chick must break its shell.
But that is a show, it's an anime, where it's about adolescence, but it's also about like apocalypse. I feel like a lot of the songs that play are like the apocalypse. So it's like the idea that something must end. We've used the word apocalypse, but we haven't really defined it. Something
the old world
must
is gone.
End. You must break up with the past in order to move to the future.
Modernity has been broadly an apocalypse for society. The old world is gone, and we have to recognize that the world of the 90s, the world of yesterday, it is dead. We're in the world of today, and that is what these games are exploring. We have 1 minute left.
Weirdly, hit the next slide, and well, I guess we can.
These games literally.
You have to accept that.
Explore that directly.
You have to deal with the consequences of your actions and the fact that the past is the past.
Very briefly, hyperreality. That is when you mistake the symbol and the signifier for the real thing. You see something on the news, that is the real world you live in. Night in the Woods is about a group of people who see one of those giants, dark forces in the world, and they think it's a literal black goat, and they start sacrificing children to it. Meanwhile,
because they can't let go of the past.
Meanwhile, the kids see the real world, and they see capitalism, and they don't sacrifice other kids to the goat at the bottom of the pit.
So death, we keep using this word apocalypse. We're talking about Utena and the idea that adolescence is an apocalypse. But the word apocalypse doesn't actually mean the end of the world. It's the end of the world in the way that Slay the Princess is the end of the world.
That is not Harry fearing death. That is Harry realizing that the old him is dead and the new him has to live in a scarier, worse world.
And we're not saying death is good or apocalypse is good, but the idea that apocalypse as representing a huge change, death and transformation. There is something beyond that shattering of the mirror. There's something beyond that decoherence that postmodernism kind of represents.
The philosophical idea that change is a form of death fundamentally.
Like, I'm not the same person I was when I was 7 years old, but that's not a bad thing. I transformed into an adult. And so
very slowly.
Yeah, very slowly, one day at a time.
And all these games ultimately come back to this idea that if there has been an apocalypse, it's not the end of the world is different, and they mostly explore the characters trying to themselves build that context and build the new world from the context that they have and the lessons they learn from the shattering of that mirror. Disco Elysium is not about the revolution coming back. Disco Elysium is about the belief that the new world could be better if we try. Slay the Princess is this drive for transcendence. We want to transcend this terrifying world. A lot of people would probably like to be something bigger and grander than a human. That the game explores that. But ultimately, Night in the Woods is the one that's most interesting. Because at the end of the day, the Union, this game ends with your dad reforming the Union that previously had protected this town.
Those bad cultists, right? They couldn't let go of the past because they're like, we used to have good union jobs and now there aren't any, and so we're gonna kill people. And in this case, this is like a more down-to-earth example. This is metamodernism in that, okay, the world changed, the old world is dead, the past is in the past, but you can go back and sincerely forge a new way toward the future. This is the dad deciding that he's going to do a little bit of good in the world.
I hope that was enjoyable. We had a breakneck pace there.
We ran out of time. Thank you very much. You really went on your anti-capitalism thing.
I would encourage you, if you enjoyed this at all, which sounds like you
Grab
did,
a flyer.
watch the previous one because we talk a lot about what modernity actually fucking is and a little more of that. Also grab one of these flyers. We want to hear from you. I want you to tell me.
Come up and yell at us in the hall if you want.
Good things, bad things, reactions. I want to understand how you are interacting with these themes.